so happy that you could join us. And if you want to tell people a little bit about what Peer is about and who you guys are, because I think a lot of people don't know.
Let's see a show of hands. I'm glad I can see you all. I was just wondering about that. How many people have heard of Peer?
Yeah.
All right, a fair amount of hands. That's always nice. Last year was my first wild horse conference I went to, and it was actually, I have to say, very inspiring. And I was able to sit in on Terry and Jim's presentations in the last half hour, and I just am constantly inspired by what you're doing, and it gives so much meaning to what we're trying to do, and so I'm happy to share that with you. I am the Executive Director of Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility, and as Linda said, I'll talk to you a little bit about what we do. So on the left side, you'll see on your screen, we work to pressure governments to better protect our environment. And so on good days, many of you fortunately are out photographing nature and being in the range, in the outdoors. And on my good day of work, I think my brain sort of feels like that picture on the left. We are sort of in the heart of the government bureaucracies, trying to figure out what they're doing. And a lot of what we do is fight corruption and government capture. And we do that through protecting public employees. Our work is driven by current and former public employees that come to us with issues. So we're located in Silver Spring, Maryland. Our BLM work is done out of Colorado. Chandra Rosenthal, unfortunately, is on a long planned vacation, but she does a lot of our work. And we have folks in California and Massachusetts as well. So what we try to do is have an effective civil service. That's really important and key to what we do. Our civil service is under attack and has been under attack for a couple of decades. And we do try to protect public health, strengthen environmental protections, and make sure we have healthy, intact ecosystems. I'm going to just talk about, I think the heart of Peer's BLM work is on land health data. It's something we've done, been working on for 10 or 15 years, and I'll explain that in a moment. We're starting to work on animal agriculture and climate change, and I wanted to just briefly mention what we're doing there. Many of you that are sort of up on the government side of work may know that BLM recently, yesterday, put out a new conservation rule, and I just wanted to offer a few observations there before making a few recommendations. And I'll say in terms of our recommendations, we really value working with other groups. That's very important to us. And we really appreciate what you think groups like Peer can be doing to help make the range healthier, and particularly address the problems of livestock raising and the fact that BLM and others sort of make wild horses the scapegoats for the problems that are happening on the range. I have some takeaways here that I'll offer you before jumping in, but essentially BLM is doing and continuing to do a very poor job assessing the health of the lands it manages, and its policies are not informed by its data. And the biggest cause of the problems on BLM lands is grazing by livestock. Animal agriculture in general is very bad for the environment and climate change. The new conservation rule that's being proposed will create new opportunities and challenges. I'm a bit skeptical because of the culture at BLM, but there are some promising things in there. But we're going to continue to see a lot of the pressures we're seeing on public lands, particularly BLM lands, and hence wild horse populations, just because of the economic interests and the consumption patterns in this country. So, so for BLM land health data, I'll just maybe see a raise of hands about how many people even know what that is. Okay, so some people, I'll give a little bit of a background. So there's been little improvements in BLM's effort to assess land health, which should be driving BLM's decision making. And so I'm just gonna pull up some notes. I am actually new to the land health work. As I said, Chandra's been doing a lot of that work, and she's not here. But BLM is required to assess rangeland health conditions by law. And if standards are not being met, they need to identify corrective courses of action to make sure they're meeting those standards. And they collect data to help track and map rangeland health. And there are a lot of things that can cause rangeland health to be degraded, and I think most of you know those causes better than me, but generally what we're seeing in the data is off-road vehicles, drought, invasive species, fire, cattle grazing, horses, all of which can cause range failure. But the most common reason for failure of land health standards by BLM's own assessments is livestock grazing. And so Pierre put out this interactive map that we published on BLM data through 2019 on rangeland health in BLM's own terms. And you can just see, hopefully you can see it visually, the reds mean land health standards are not being met, and the reasons are livestock. And then there are other causes which we'll get into. Now we have new data that's going to be coming out in a couple weeks. I'll get to that in a minute. I'll share some of that data informally with you. So looking at this old data through 2019, again, drilling into why is our rangelands in such bad health, you see the red bar is livestock. According to BLM data. The purple bar is livestock and wild horses. The blue bar is just wild horses. And then there are other causes in yellow, and then causes not being identified. So I hope you can see that screen just visually. Above everything else is livestock grazing. It's caused that. So also, at about, there's a lot of stuff here that I won't jump into. I'll share my slides with you. There's also, although BLM is required to assess all of its grazing lands, it was only doing about 50% of those lands. So it wasn't even following the law. And the data I showed you was the land that it had assessed. So we have a new data set that's going to come out in a couple weeks. I'd ask you not to share this too widely because we're QA/QCing it, but we do know enough, and we know that essentially 5 years later the story's the same. BLM's assessed a little bit more land, and a little bit of the reasons they're giving, a little less livestock, but not much has changed in the 5 years despite BLM promises to do a better job. And so what we're finding again is it's livestock that is causing rangeland health to be degraded, according to BLM's own records. BLM has not assessed now about a third of their lands. Solely wild horses is a very, very small portion of lands according to BLM data. And so what does this mean? BLM, as you all know, does not have a national strategy to assess the impacts of livestock grazing, although its data indicates that that's the main reason rangeland health is struggling. It's not horses. There may be areas where wild horses are a problem for rangeland health according to BLM data, but they're a very small number of areas. It's just really the livestock that's stressing BLM lands. I'll just briefly talk about something we've started to look at. A lot of people in the government are coming to us just with animal agriculture in general. And I wanted to share some statistics. I'm a media here. A lot of these statistics surprised me, and it's certainly going to look at the way I approach particularly red meat consumption. is looking at global greenhouse gas emissions. All the data is pointing to beef as being a major emitter, much more so than pork or poultry or crops. And so if you are a meat eater, it's better to eat poultry, much, much better. And I found this particular slide, which was pulled together by Dr. Sarah Vai at the University of Maryland, about how much land livestock uses in the U.S. And you can see much of this land, if you look at the center, is federally owned grasslands. And so we know this is a huge subsidized bonus for those ranchers that are grazing on these public lands, and it is a massive amount of land. And we know that beef in particular uses a lot of land for the amount of calories it delivers, by far the most. So, just turn this on. And we know that cattle are very bad for our water sources, or sources of water in our ecosystems. And that's just some data there that shows that. And so, from our perspective, we talk a lot about climate change, but we sort of view climate change as a symptom that we can't address singularly. We cannot pave our country with solar fields and wind farms and solve the problem. It's really about ecological overreach and consumption patterns, and energy is part of that problem. But the problem most people aren't talking about is animal agriculture. It just seems to be a third rail in the United States that people don't want to talk about. And so we're seeing the price for that, the price for the power of that industry, and our own consumption patterns on BLM wetlands. I'll talk just briefly about the conservation rule. Maybe a show of hands, how many people know what the conservation rule is? Okay, a couple of hands, it's hard to see everyone, but so this is the rule the administration just released yesterday. I think they released a draft of it about a year ago. So the headline is, here's one headline, but the headline everywhere is new rule prioritizes conservation on public lands. And so I think politically it's been a big plus for the Biden administration with conservation environmental groups. I'm a little bit skeptical about what this is really going to mean and whether it's going to change much. And here's one reason why I'm skeptical. Despite all the data I just showed you, in the preamble to the rule, meaning BLM will always state why they're doing a rule, they say BLM lands have become increasingly degraded through the appearance of invasive species, extreme wildlife events, prolonged drought, and habitat fragmentation. Nowhere do they mention grazing and cattle grazing as a cause for the problems that they're trying to address. So that's a problem. The culture doesn't appear to be changing through this rule. And so they do mention some positive things about protecting intact landscapes, developing restoration and mitigation planning, and protecting areas of critical environmental concern. All of this would require, I think, removing cattle, but we don't again see that. They did promise to expand land health evaluations, which I just showed you the maps for, to all lands, not just grazing lands. So that would be increasing it to adding up about 100 million acres onto the job responsibilities of the BLM field staff. We find BLM has little capacity of all the sort of federal land agencies. They have the least capacity to do the jobs. And so it's very difficult to see how they will do this new 100 million acre responsibilities they have. They're way behind on their current land health assessments, but they've had this new responsibility. And then we also find that they're not using that data to make land use decisions. So It's a good thing in theory that they're expanding the use of land health evaluations. I'm not really sure what it's gonna change on the ground though. And of course, from our perspective, areas of critical environmental concern which offer more protections are a good thing. We don't know how that's gonna play out. And then they have established this restoration and mitigation leases, which is, I'm gonna just mention those for a second. It's sort of uncharted territory. As you all know, land can be leased for grazing, it can be leased for oil and gas development. Now they're gonna allow leases for restoration and mitigation projects. Again, I do wonder about the capacity for BLM to manage these types of leases. And there is a concern that industries could buy up these leases to offset their destructive activities on other lands. And so it might mean, although there are some protections, but it might mean that the public sort of gets edged out of what little input it does have on BLM lands. And so really uncharted territory here. We'll be watching it closely. Ultimately, BLM should be managing land already to protect the health of the land without these leases. And you know, briefly, a few other things we're working on. We work very closely with Western Watersheds, advocates for the West. We are suing BLM for failing to conduct environmental reviews on grazing lands. And I just learned about this, I think, from Linda, but there is a bill we're going to look into from Representatives Huffman out of California and Smith about voluntarily retiring grazing permits, which I hear are very hard to get out of. And there are recommendations here. Again, I'll share these with you. These are exactly the same recommendations we gave last year. But essentially, you know, we're going to work really hard through our data, through politics and policy, through lawsuits, to really try and make sure wherever we can that BLM is using land health data to make decisions about how to manage the land, which they're currently not doing but are required to do. And so there's my contact information. If there's time, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Yeah, well, we'll do a few questions, Tim, if that's okay.
I'd like to-
Ginger?
Tim, Ginger Fedak here. Prior to the publishing of the conservation rule yesterday, BLM held public meetings to take input. I was at one of these meetings in Colorado. It was a huge room. There were hundreds of people there. There were only a few of us public land advocates there. It was almost all ranchers, and that's why the grazing and livestock things did not end up in the final plan. They lined up in long lines after the presentations to give their comments to this plan, and that's why it's not in there.
Yeah, there's a lot of hysteria around anything to do with conservation right now in public land. It's very unfortunate to see.
Anybody else have questions?
Thank you.
Is this online?
I'm sorry?
Is this information?
Oh, how can people find this, like the interactive map too? Could you explain that? If you can actually move slides to see, it overlaps and stuff like that. It's really amazing. But is all this on site?
Yeah. So we should have our updated map in about 2 weeks. I know people are using it a lot to help inform decisions in their local community. So I'd be happy to share, you know, I should have put that address down here, I didn't think of it, but share that updated map with all of you. And maybe Linda, you could circulate it. It should be done real soon.
Yeah.
As well as our older map. And people are using it to challenge different activities on different allotments that BLM manages that information. BLM criticized our map as inaccurate, but we used their data, and so we told them if we had any incorrect data, to please let us know. We didn't get the response, but publicly they criticized this, but it's all their data through a Freedom of Information Act, so.
Okay, Charlotte?
Is there any way we could get your recommendations that you showed on the last slide? Because we're putting together, a joint letter to BLM, and some of those would be
Yeah.
good wording.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll share this right after this. I'll share it
Perfect.
with you, Linda.
Okay.
The PowerPoint.
All right, thank you.
Apologize, I finished it at the last minute. And then the data that we have in there where I say do not share, we should have that available publicly in a week or two. And I'll be sure to share that with Linda when it's ready. I don't think the numbers are gonna change. If they change, it's gonna be very minuscule.
Okay. Dave?
Hi, Tim, I just wanted to make this is Dave Strickland with Western Watersheds. I just wanted to make a quick statement for everybody here. The willing seller grazing buyout law is a great idea, but of course it won't pass. And right now, I work in grazing buyouts, and as the regs are written now, it's illegal not to not graze. And so in order, if I wanna buy out an allotment, I can buy the base property and the allotment, but then I have to do NEPA in order to not graze it. And that usually kills it. So it can be done, and I've done it. There are some places, if you can, on any law, a land management law for an area, tack on language that says you can have willing seller buyouts in that little spot, then that gives me the chance, when a rancher gets a divorce and his new wife doesn't wanna go out and live on the ranch, then I can buy him out. But it's really difficult. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Dave, for sharing that. That's stunning, and I actually did not know you have to go through the NEPA process, thank you.
Craig?
Yeah, I wanted to know what you thought the chances were that the voluntary public lands retirement bill would pass?
Did you hear that?
I did not know.
He wanted to know what you think the chances are that a Grazing Retirement Act is gonna will pass, or win.
Yeah, I mean, I think as Dave said, it's not gonna pass, no.
Okay, thank you.
I think something like that would require a lot of work, and I think Western Watersheds in general, or Dave would be in a better position to know. We don't do a lot of lobbying, but I think these would require really heavy lifting from a lot of groups to get behind that, to get anything like that passed.
Anybody else? Okay, I think that's it. Thank you so much, Tim.